testing, and they're getting compensated for it. And it was a hard nut to crack, I'll tell you. The providers kept bringing it up. You know, they're focused on their RVU credits and everything that takes away from that. They expect to be compensated for. So we, you know, my organization came up to the challenge, thankfully. It makes my job quite a bit easier when they're engaged and involved in the process.
So I don't envy either one of these gentlemen with the tasks that they have ahead of them in the next few months. Those are gigantic. I will say that with scope and complexity and resources allocated to the projects that they're doing, there is an opportunity. And that opportunity is to level set, to get everybody on the same page at that same starting point, at that similar competency level. The three keys to technology have nothing to do with technology, in my opinion. It's workflow, workflow, workflow. And I'll go one step further. It's standardized workflow, standardized workflow, standardized workflow. Projects of that size and complexity gives you that opportunity to deliver those, which are absolutely critical elements of success. And I will tell you, we don't have those major changes at Maine General coming. We will be with all scripts, both inpatient on SCM and ambulatory on TouchWorks for a few more years at the very least. And we are not at a standardized workflow level. We launched TouchWorks in 2003. So we have 13 years on a particular platform, and we are nowhere near the standardization level that we need to be, which creates amazing inefficiencies, lack of effectiveness, lack of productivity, lack of satisfaction, lack of everything you can possibly throw under the sun. We now, 13 years later, and I've been the CIO for 8 years, so shame on me, we now, only recently this summer, incorporated a very heavy medical director and medical leadership governance process around all things related to TouchWorks. It is essential, and it is incredibly difficult work. Hundreds of medical staff providers that we have throughout the organization, and to get to standardized workflows is no small task. And we don't have the thrust of a brand new system going in or a major upgrade or conversion. And so we've got that painstaking work of undoing 13 years worth of work and moving forward in a very different model than we've ever done before. It's kind of a microcosm of all things that are happening when we move to a more coordinated level of care as an industry, which is essential. If we're ever going to be more efficient than we are today and deliver better care at lower cost, the coordination of services is critical. So much of that is around standard communications and standard practices throughout. And we haven't even achieved it after 13 years of using an EMR. So if there's one piece, and I know both of you, because you guys are great guys, that you're all over it and making sure that that is what part of the plan is, to have those standardized workflows as part of these deployments. Kudos to you, and I'll be running as fast as I can to try to catch up.
But Dan, I don't think either one of us would have wanted to do the gigantic project you just completed a few years ago, which is moving into a brand new hospital campus. So.
Well, thanks.
Great, thank you. So let's keep going. So we've heard about MACRA, which was what, a dysfunctional ACO or something like that? That we heard it all. And then there's the MIPS part and all of this way that we're going to be carrying for or recording transactions in the future. So from a technology perspective, let's talk about how are the systems that we're getting going to be upgraded with some new technology, if you know that or not. And so how is that technology coming into play, as well as the new process of whether we're going to meet MIPS and MACRA requirements as that's coming forward. And the same thing with the new stage 3, which is no longer called stage 3, but all of this meaningful use stuff that's out there. So Dennis, you want to start?
Sure. I wish we had a choice on whether to meet these things or not. When they try to sweeten the pot by providing incentives, but they quickly follow up with a stick if you don't participate. So, in the way, meaning Medicare penalty on your payment reimbursement. So, we are on the tracks. We've just finished stage 2 requirements for both inpatient and outpatient, and are getting ready for stage 3. Some of the things there are e-prescribing, electronic e-prescribing, the new regulatory requirement for July 1st for controlled substances, if I can say it. we're on the tracks for that, and that's a huge implementation for us, using two-factor auth for producing those. So we're working on that around the outpatient effort that we're doing, and we're moving on it. Some of the things that I know that we're going to worry about, we talked a little, you heard the stuff that's going on with Sensio with our organization. That's stage 3 is now going to require that you start taking some of this biometric data in and have a bit more of a patient activity-centric solution. So it's not now just about reporting the data out and sharing it with other organizations. It's now about receiving that data from patients. So we're starting to gear up for that. And we've made our way. I'm lucky in that I've got a program manager that's focused on this, and she's, I think, 3/4 of the way of reading the 2,200 pages that have come out on MACRA, and we're lining ourselves up for it. We feel like we're in good shape for it. It's going to be a challenge. A lot of work and workflow rework that has to happen around those requirements. So that's it.
So I guess I look at it a little bit different, because I get to see what I call the tale of two cities. I'm in Biddeford part of the week, and then I'm in Farmington, Maine, rural Farmington the rest of the week. And in Biddeford, Southern Maine was slow to get the meaningful use incentives, so they're scrambling to get all that money and meet those requirements. So we're working hard on that and staying on top of those. But Farmington got out early. We milked all of the payments, all the incentive payments out under stage 1, pretty much. 1 year on stage 2. But for us to continue on that journey, we were going to have to make investments. So this will give you the relative size of the organization. We're going to have to make investments of about approaching $500,000 in capital to avoid Medicare penalties of about $30,000 a year. So we did have a choice. And sitting with the CFO, that's basically what we decided to do. We're going to wait. We're not going to meet the meaningful use requirements in that small rural hospital because we really couldn't cost justify it. The return on investment wasn't there. Now, with that said, there's still all the other stuff we got to worry about. EPCS is at the forefront right now, getting ready for that, meeting those requirements. We still got to stay legal. We still got to meet our requirements. But the meaningful use of stuff, no, not yet. We did find we have a choice.
So we're not deploying new technology to address MIPS, MACRA, or use stage 3. Again, we're staying with all scripts for the foreseeable, and yet we have a very large climb to take still in short order. EPCS certainly being the first one, right now a July 1 pending deadline, and that affects every provider that may be prescribing controlled substances. So to think that this is a simple, stay with the vendor and you're all set to go, not true. The bar keeps being raised. I have 2 pole vaulter sons, pretty cool. Tangential, just real quick, they chose a sport that I know nothing about, so I could no longer coach them. Very smart boys, by the way. Very smart boys. But the bar keeps being raised. There's no question about that. And this is going to sound a little repetitive to my last message, but the workflows and the standardization capture of information is a critical component to achieving a lot of these pieces. Sharing the information across the continuum of care, be it inside of an organization or statewide or otherwise, is another critical component. And that higher level of analytical ability through structured data is an absolute must. That's not an easy thing to do when medical staff members are already stretched thin, focused on RVUs and productivity and patient time. Structured data versus transcribed data, et cetera, much more difficult to do, much more timely to do, or timely ineffective to do. Those are the challenges that we're facing daily. Putting a lot of reliance on our medical staff-driven governance model, which I've mentioned now for the 3rd time. It's an absolute essential piece to confirm what those standards are and have the authorization and accountability enforced throughout the organization. No shortage of challenge, and we're all facing that, other than you're a little bit lucky in Franklin of not having to do stage 3.
Although I have to answer to the auditors every year why we didn't.
So Dennis, you alluded a little bit to the e-prescribing and started off in saying it's a whole lot of work. So can you spend just a little bit more time on that to talk about the true technology components associated with e-prescribing so that folks can get an understanding of what that is?
Yeah, so we do e-prescribing already with our outpatient facilities. We've got about 90 outpatient facilities that are already doing that today. It's the new EPCS requirements that now require two-factor auth. So we have partnered up with Imprivata to provide that single sign-on capability to be able to co-sign those electronic meds when providers produce those. So we're in the process of, we've just kicked off that project. We expect it to go live before July 1st, as well as a few other things that we're trying to cram into that same little window. So getting it done is not going to be easy. It's going to be a major workflow change for our providers. It includes rolling out not only EPCS for the organization, but right now a lot of our providers in the hospital still use the old-fashioned pads, prescription pads. We're moving away from that as part of the solution. So it'll be a major transformation for our folks and lots of training. So at first when I started looking at it, it's like, yeah, no big deal. We should be able to do this. Then when you look at the workflow requirements and the additional technology, again, the technology piece is the easy part. It's getting the providers trained, getting them part of the design of the setup that we're going to do, and so it's going to be a fair amount of work for us. Folks are excited about it because it does provide some new technology for us that will allow us to use that for remote access capabilities moving forward. So two-factor auth, we still do not do. We're a little behind. We're ahead in some ways on security. We do encryption on all the desktops and all that, but two-factor auth is one that our organization has not allowed us to do because of the complexities of getting in once you use that technology. So this will be part of the rollout. So they'll get a couple options right out of the gate.
The only thing I'd add is that there's a sooner deadline to EPCS, which is getting the providers to start using the prescription monitoring program, I think by January 1st.
Yes.
So, they're not all that good about using it now. There's a lot of them, the only time they use their email is when they need to remember their password to PMP, and then they don't remember their email password either, so we'll get flooded with help desk calls. So I think we've got to make a major initiative just to get out there and get all of our providers re-enrolled so they can meet that. The other thing we're doing right now is template work within the ambulatory EMR so that we can be prompting them to be checking these things now, that as part of their flow sheet, that they're checking for history of the PMP and other things.
I think I'd only add very briefly, Imprivata stock might be good because we chose them for our two-factor as well. I guess that's all I'm going to say at the moment.
So two-factor authentication is coming into play quite a bit, and as the gentleman have been talking about, it's obviously from a medical record perspective. At our hospital, we're also doing it for some remote access to come in as two-factor, and we're really recently rolling out an employee self-service for their payroll system, and that will require the dual auth as well. So we're talking about 5,000 employees using it. So security is really out there and is requiring us to take some additional steps and some heavy rollout, heavy lifting of training and employee and patient engagement as we and physician engagement as we move forward. It's there. It really is part of our system. So staying on security. So we heard lots about cybersecurity. So let's just go through the panel real quick and see what were some of their thoughts and suggestions based on the panel this morning on cybersecurity and what are you doing? So, Dan?
So, for however long I stay at Maine General, yes, I am the CIO whose systems were breached. Last year, at this time, as a matter of fact, our systems were absolutely under attack. That particular incident that remains an open FBI investigation. And needless to say, it changes a whole lot of things. And so I think the panel did a great job this morning. I would take back continued increasing awareness of every single member that touches your system, be it an employee, a contractor, a volunteer, whomever may be accessing resources on your networks, on your systems. They have to be as well educated and exposed to the potential pitfalls and dangers of the attacks that are happening on a 24/7 basis. We are very fortunate that Mike Keeley, who was one of the panelists earlier, has joined our team. He has brought some incredible energy and insight and made remarkable improvements already in the awareness arena for Maine General. And needless to say, we had a lot of reason over the last 12 months to make sure that everyone was well aware of security challenges and how best to protect the information and assets that Maine General IT is responsible for. We can never rest for a moment, and the continued investments, we do have a burning platform. I wish for all of you to just use Maine General as the example of the burning platform, never go through what we had to go through and continue to go through, and utilize the learnings of our public announcements, et cetera, of the dangers and the pitfalls. Keep your senior management teams and your boards incredibly involved in the process and necessity of continuous investments in the security arena. The last thing you want to do is wait for the OCR auditors to complete their findings and tell you how much you're going to be fined for your particular breach, not to mention the incredible loss of confidence that many community members will have as a result of not protecting the data that you need to. So it's not a title I'm at all proud of. I absolutely will wear that for the rest of my career and will work as absolutely hard as I possibly can to ensure that it never happens again.
There's not a lot I can add because Barb Armstrong's still here in the audience. No, just kidding. No, Barb does a fantastic job for Maine Health, and I end up taking a lot of direction from her. She gives us great guidance on what we need to do. The one thing I would add that really falls on my shoulders is, as we heard this morning, probably the biggest danger to the security of our systems is our end users. Their care and probably even some of us ourselves sometimes with how we use our email and what we can fall victim to. So what I find is probably my biggest role is doing that education and making sure that I'm getting out there and letting people know about how to detect those emails, how to be suspicious of those emails, not what to worry about, what links not to click on the internet and things like that. So probably that's the biggest role for me right now, is worrying about education.
Yeah, and I'll chime in on that. The users are your front line, so you really have to educate the users. You can spend lots of money on technology, and we already do that. And there's no end to it, so you really need to make sure that your users are well educated. I have a favorite phrase: "Let no crisis go unused." And so when sorry, Danny, but when things happen like that in an industry, we make sure that folks hear about it, not just Maine General, but it happens every day across the country. The ransomware, we make sure that we're letting our folks know. My IT security officer, information security officer, sitting out in the audience, and we do regular communications up to staff, not only about how they can protect us, but how they can protect their own home computers, keeping them educated on how they can protect that. Doesn't hurt us internally, so we look for opportunities to do that. We also, some of the other things that we've done, you can build a small workforce just around security, and we utilize a firm out of Portland to monitor all our system logs. We would have had to hire about 6 or 8 people to do that on a daily basis. We pay a small fee, essentially, a yearly fee to this company. All the logs go out to them, they monitor those logs, they have experts that review those logs and then alert us daily as to activities. Chatter happening on certain PCs to servers out on the internet, that sort of thing. And we're able to, it's a little reactive. I prefer it to be more proactive. At the current time, it's reactive, so they see the chatter, they identify the systems and let us know, and then we have folks go re-image those PCs. This is the current practice. That solution has sort of brought up other issues, people doing inappropriate surfing of the web. We all have blocking technologies to make sure that folks are using our internet presence appropriately, but not 100%. So they've covered some of that activity going on. So it helps us focus on making sure that the systems are available to the providers, and we're not having to have a small workforce dedicated to the day-to-day monitoring of those systems. So it's been work that we've had it for about a year and a half now. So if you're not doing something like that, I would recommend it. For just less than an FTE, you could have the same thing. So that works well for us. And then, just good due diligence, making sure that you're staying on top of your daily communications out to the users and letting them know that, about password strength and what they do really matters. So,
I did want to assure Bart that my Windows NT desktop will be retired within the next month.
I think we have an XP machine coming.
Excellent, thank you so much, panel. So let's open it up for questions. These are technology experts, so what kind of questions do we have today for these folks? Yes?
I'm curious, you talked about new system implementation, you talked about regulation bars that are rising, you talked about cybersecurity, you talked about some innovative ideas. How do you prioritize these many important things? What are your organizations doing to kind of figure out where to focus and how to juggle those things?
take the first shot. It's easy. They're all number one. They are really all number one. They all have to happen. So dividing and conquering, your staff and making sure that leadership within your team know what they have to do to keep the ball moving. So there, from a dollars perspective, it's like Danny mentioned. It's constantly sitting in front of your board and your executive leadership to make sure they understand what the dollars they need to do those things to protect the organization. Robert Rebus mentioned earlier this morning, it's not a matter of when you breach, you're probably already breached and just don't know it. So making sure that you have systems to catch that and shut it down when it's happening.
I think part of the answer, Danny touched on this earlier, is it's all about governance too. Yeah, and having that governance. We can't be the decision makers of what is the most important priority for the organization, and that responsibility shouldn't be laid on us, because we may pick the geeky projects instead. It's all about governance. When I think of what we have in place at Maine Health, there is a very intricate governance structure because each organization has governance, and then there's a shared governance that sits over that, and then the executives even above that. So when we have these big projects and need that prioritization, we look to the organization to give us that priority and explain to them the consequences and the resource limitations.
Couldn't agree with both of the gentlemen up here and what they've said already. So if everything is a priority one, clearly you can't do everything by tomorrow. So part of it is communication on pace, and you can do lots of things at the same time. What things are going to be accomplished when really mandates and needs to be mandated by the organization, by your strategic planning process, by your organizational objectives, by your governance process, to say this one needs more resources allocated to it because it needs to be done sooner. But we can do heat risk assessments, radar screens of saying the likelihood of an occurrence and what the impact of that occurrence, if it happens in terms of a compliance measure or security measure, et cetera, may rank that thing first and foremost. We, as the IT keepers, and if we know that information, that needs to be communicated to the final decision makers so that the appropriate resources are allocated. We'd love to have everything done yesterday, but then why would we come to work, right?
Thank you. Other questions?
So Ralph said he was lobbying for 30-hour days. Is that what you're looking for now? Just to get it all done?
One thing, just an anecdote, my employees gave me a T-shirt a few years ago at Franklin, and it was two stick people, and one doesn't have their back, the other one's holding it in their hand and says, "I've got your back." And I think that really goes to that. Part of that is how we manage that, is we have to make sure we've got the backs of our staff, because they can't do everything in a day either. It's falling on them, the pressures to get the stuff done, and you gotta just tell them, there's only so much you can do in a day, and if you can't get what that one user is hollering at you for done, I've got your back.
I think part of the scoping everything as well is also very important, because money talks, right? As does risk. And believe it or not, we can't buy everything, so there's risk associated with it. It's not just the manpower and everything to get it done. It costs a ton of money, and there's a level of risk associated with not being able to do everything instantly. So it's a big portion to it as well. Great, anything else? Yes, sir.
So just on the topic of value-based care, and kind of going off of Jeff's presentation earlier, so as organizations start to shift, more from a fee-for-service payment model to more value-based care models, taking on more risk, can each of you talk about some of the different analytic capabilities, decision support capabilities that your organization is asking for, either from finance or somebody in decision support or contracting, so that they can have the tools and visibility to understand how they're performing clinically and financially, so that as you enter into these risk-based contracts, you know that you're going to be competitive or not lose your shirt, if you will.
Sure, so I'll take a shot. So at Maine General, we've made a couple of investments, one on population health risk management analytics, and blending with some existing tools that we have and existing data sets that we have. We've also deployed recently a care management platform to assist those high risk, the top of the pyramid patients, once they're identified through the Pop Health Risk Analytics platform. Then our care managers have those tools and at least patient profiles in terms of the likelihood of occurrence and what will be the best measures moving forward. You're absolutely right, we get hit by decision support, by our ACO team, by finance for more and more data. So the investment in those analytical platforms are key. Not only do you need the platforms, but that source of truth that Jeff was talking about earlier is, there's a lot of pushing and shoving around that. As you move data around and aggregate it, making sure that you're maintaining that normalcy of that data and the validity of that data. And then so much of it from that point, if you've got those established principles and guidelines that you can use in the profiles, goes right back to the communications, back out to those impacted by the changes that you're looking to incorporate into either patient care delivery and or other decisions that you're making as an organization.
I do think there's a chicken and the egg factor in this too, because the payers aren't ready to shift us to that model. The value-based purchasing that we see right now with Medicare is plus or minus 1 or 2%. I mean, it's not very much money to incentivize us to invest millions into some of these packages. So I think, at least in our situation, we're moving slowly because it's not there yet. It's probably going to hit us upside the head. It's going to switch in one day, and then we're going to have to be ready. I do know that, with Epic, we are implementing Healthy Planet and some of those tools to be ready. But the other side of this is, when do you have enough population to make it worthwhile that you can actually do some real analytics on that data? If you've got the entire state of Maine, that's one thing with 1.2 million people. When you start looking at the smaller communities, you can have wild swings month to month in the health status of the patients in that area. So when are you big enough to actually be ready to go into those risk models too? That's part of the question.
And from my perspective, the vendors typically look at hospitals like cash cows. We don't have lots of money to spend on data warehouses typically. We're looking to implement data warehouses to keep the current money that's coming in and not get hit with penalties typically. And so, there is an extra money usually in the game for us. It's how do we keep the little bit that we are getting for those reimbursements. The challenge always is funding those initiatives. Data warehouses aren't cheap. They take lots of resources. So that's the ongoing challenge. Like Danny's doing at his hospital, we've cobbled together some solutions that meet the individual silos. So we have, a care management solution for our outpatient practices. We have an analytic solution for our ACO, and the challenge for us will be moving forward will be consolidating that information and coming up with a data warehouse that utilizes all that data, and that's what we're struggling with these days. We have a potential solution in-house, but it takes resources and talent to build that out, which I think we all struggle with in some ways. And there's not more money in it for us typically, so that's the other challenge. You know, our CEO, when we approached him with some of the ACO needs and other things that we needed to do, well, how are you paying for it? With the potential savings or the cuts that we're not gonna get hit with, and, well, that doesn't quite cut it. So it's, I mean, that's a cost avoidance thing. That's not really, doesn't provide the dollars to fund the needs to do this kind of stuff. So that's typically what we're struggling with. We've cobbled together solutions to meet each of the silo needs, and moving forward, that's not gonna cut it from a true population